Good morning, everyone, and welcome to your executive level explainer for Friday, May 1st, 2026. I'm going to be your anchor today, taking you through a deep dive analysis of the incredibly pivotal events that have completely reshaped the global landscape over just the last 24 hours. We are quite literally witnessing a moment of profound structural change across geopolitics, macroeconomics, and global supply chains. And our goal today? To map out exactly how all of these massive developments interconnect. So let's dive right into this top of the hour rundown to see how a localized blockade cascades into a permanent rewiring of global logistics. Here's what's on the agenda. First, the dual maritime blockade. Second, quantifying the economic shock. Third, high inflation and global debt. Fourth, powering the AI revolution. Fifth, the end of just in time. And finally, the new regional reality. Starting with Section 1, the dual maritime blockade and the squeeze on the strait. We begin our broadcast right on the front lines in the Middle East, where the strategic landscape has officially entered a period of extreme kinetic intensity. Overnight, the diplomatic window formally expired, and the situation in the Strait of Hormuz has completely devolved. Naval analysts are now classifying this as an active dual blockade. To really grasp the severity of this disruption, just think about this staggering number: 94%. Vessel traffic through the strait has plummeted by 94% as of this morning. It's a near total paralysis, and it's driven by two opposing forces. The U.S. Navy is enforcing a strict embargo on Iranian ports to neutralize littoral defense threats, and Tehran has countered with an asymmetrical closure of the Persian Gulf. Commercial vessels are just completely caught in the middle of this intense standoff.
Now, you might be wondering about the broader fallout here. The crucial point is that despite a nominal ceasefire in Lebanon giving us a brief localized pause, the lack of a formal maritime agreement is causing an absolute nightmare of a logistical and humanitarian backlog. We've got over 150 tankers currently anchored just outside the Gulf, totally paralyzed by the active threat of sea mines and direct seizure. Meanwhile, UN monitors are reporting that 1.5 million displaced people across the Levant are effectively cut off. They are waiting on essential grain and medical supplies that simply cannot get through the bottleneck.
Moving right along to Section 2, quantifying the economic shock, focusing on energy and fiscal dominance.
Transitioning from the physical front lines to the macroeconomic fallout, global financial institutions are now formally quantifying the shadow of this maritime closure. The IMF, in their latest World Economic Outlook, has officially downgraded its global growth projection for 2026 down to 3.1%. They're citing structural damage from the largest disruption to world energy supplies since the 1970s. It's a striking picture of the rising state of fiscal dominance we're entering right now. When you contrast that downgraded growth against the global surge in defense spending, which is jumping by an average of 2.7 percentage points of GDP, you see a massive collision course. Economists are sounding the alarm that this dynamic is going to crowd out essential social spending all over the world. And this historic energy shock is being compounded today by a huge regulatory blow. As of today, May 1st, China's export prohibition on sulfuric acid officially takes effect. Now, why does that matter? Well, sulfuric acid is absolutely critical for manufacturing both fertilizers and semiconductors. It's essential. Because of this ban, spot prices have doubled in just under 7 weeks. When you combine this kind of severe resource scarcity with those massive military budgets we just talked about, we're seeing the ignition of long-term stagflationary pressures right across Europe and East Asia.
That brings us to Section 3, high inflation and global debt, and how central banks are responding.
Over in the financial markets, all eyes have been heavily focused on the central bankers tasked with navigating this incredibly treacherous environment, especially the Federal Reserve. Right now, the Fed is stuck in a restrictive holding pattern. Wednesday marked the final policy meeting under outgoing Chair Jerome Powell, and the committee voted to keep the federal funds rate completely unchanged, sitting in the 3.5 to 3.75% range. That's the third consecutive pause, and the reason is clear. Central bankers are battling deeply sticky inflation, driven directly by those spiking oil prices from the Gulf blockade. With U.S. headline inflation climbing to 3.3% in March, the committee is anchored by the harsh reality of higher-for-longer energy costs. And the context for all of this is pretty daunting. As Kevin Warsh prepares to take over as Fed chair on May 15th, institutional investors are staring down a global debt pool that has just surpassed $315 trillion. That is a staggering amount of debt. This mounting burden, coupled with rising term premiums, has left the benchmark 10-year Treasury yield settled near 4.30%. Basically, markets are cautiously, and honestly it's somewhat painfully, pricing in a reality where price stability somehow has to be achieved within the incredibly tight constraints of a wartime economy.
Let's pivot now to Section 4, powering the AI revolution and the massive shift toward nuclear energy.
All of these macroeconomic pressures are creating a truly fascinating domino effect in the tech sector. Right now, there is a massive infrastructure push to secure the physical energy needed for the agentic AI revolution. Hyperscalers are hitting a wall, facing grid connection delays stretching between 5 and 9 years in major hubs. Think about that. At the same time, single AI training clusters now demand up to 200 megawatts of continuous power. Because of this massive mismatch, the tech industry is aggressively detaching its digital infrastructure from a highly volatile global grid. Energy security isn't just an afterthought anymore. It's viewed as being just as critical to technological leadership as the software innovation itself.
And this pivot to independent power isn't just theoretical, it is actively happening as we speak. Just this week, a landmark proof-of-concept demonstration took place at the University of Utah. A research reactor successfully powered a mini AI data center for the very first time. It is a massive milestone. Nuclear microreactor technology is officially emerging as the strategic backbone for the next generation of computing. We are basically watching the tech giants become their own utility companies to bypass those exact macroeconomic energy shocks we covered earlier in the broadcast.
On to Section 5, the end of just-in-time and the complete rewiring of global logistics. We have to talk about the vital arteries of global commerce because supply chain networks are undergoing a permanent structural rewiring right in front of us. To truly understand the sheer scale of the Middle East crisis, consider this. The situation in the Strait of Hormuz has essentially removed 20% of the world's seaborne oil and liquefied natural gas from their traditional, highly efficient routes. That is 1/5 of all global energy commerce physically displaced from the map. It's a massive disruption.
And the costs are piling up fast. With shipowners anticipating months of continued disruption, emergency conflict surcharges have absolutely skyrocketed. Logistics professionals are now getting hit with up to a $3,000 premium per container. The financial shock to the shipping industry is immediate, and of course, those costs are inevitably passed right down the line to consumers, further fueling that sticky inflation the central banks are fighting so hard to control.
What we're seeing is the definitive death of the low-cost, just-in-time models that completely defined the previous era of globalization. Major maritime carriers have now fully integrated the Cape of Good Hope detour into their global operations, which tacks on roughly 14 extra days to standard voyage times. Logistics reports show that 72% of trade volume originally intended for these geopolitical choke points has now been permanently rerouted. The industry is just accepting a new, much more expensive reality, one that's built on regional inventory buffers rather than perfectly timed, seamless global shipping. Which brings us to our final section, the new regional reality. To really synthesize our deep dive briefing today, we have to look ahead at the trajectory for the rest of 2026. Based on everything we're seeing, even if a diplomatic breakthrough miraculously happens in Islamabad this month, the structural shifts are already locked in. The world has collectively learned a very hard lesson. Reliance on a singular maritime choke point is a liability that global markets simply will no longer accept. The premium on energy independence, whether that's a tech giant building its own nuclear microreactor or a nation subsidizing its own domestic semiconductor supply chain, that premium is absolutely here to stay. We are likely going to see a continued, highly aggressive move toward regionalized, self-sustaining industrial hubs through the remainder of 2026 and well beyond. The low-cost, seamlessly interconnected global market we enjoyed for the past 2 decades is fracturing. So, as we close today's briefing, I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. Will this fragmentation of our interconnected global market become our permanent reality, or will a new, more resilient form of globalization eventually take its place? Thank you so much for joining this Executive Explainer. Stay informed, stay safe, and have a great morning.